buttons every day. This will be Wednesday, May 27th, advanced period 1 as we continue into the Brovi Talks. Where did we leave off with yesterday?
We just
When
got
the one
you
store.
17,
You
haven't
told us the second one.
So I just finished the first one and that's
Yeah.
it?
The next one was going to be the story of how
So
you
then
shop.
we're definitely behind if you guys. I'll have to try it, probably because you guys spend so much time yelling at you. Alright. Then to move forward, I'll have to try and give you these slightly expedited versions. I'll have to cut some bits out. This is why I try to make us go faster when you try to yell at each other and not make me talk over you. So I've not gotten to the second one at all. Okay, so we're going to fast forward then to when I'm in 8th grade. So I went 7 years without getting arrested again, which is really
You said
good.
you were a freshman.
Right, I'm not done talking to kids trying to do science while I'm trying to teach. So go forward to my 8th grade year, because that's when my poor choice started. I just didn't get arrested until my freshman year. End of 8th grade year, so the second half of my 8th grade year, I started making a poor choice. And there's no real way of trying to make it sound better than it is. I started shoplifting. And shoplifting is where you go into stores and you steal stuff that doesn't belong to you. And I had friends who did it, and they told me how to do it, and I figured I'm smart enough, I can probably get away with it. Turns out I was smart enough, and I was frighteningly good at it, and I shoplifted a lot. Not to glorify it, because I don't want you thinking I was shoplifting guns and radios and stuff like that. I shoplifted pretty much candy and comic books, because I was a dork. But I was a thievery little dork. And so I got to the point where I would steal them I got to the point where I would steal so much candy I couldn't eat it all. I would bring it to school in duffel bags and just hand it out to other kids. And that was partly why I did it too, because it made me feel popular, because other kids would like me, and I was that kid that wanted other kids to like him, so I would just bring in candy to school, and I would just make it rain candy to other people. And I did that the second half of my 8th grade year, all the summer between 8th grade and freshman year, and then beginning of my freshman year, I continued to do it until wrestling season, and this would have been in October, late October. I knew I was wearing a jacket. And we had a wrestling meet after school. And normally when you have a meet after school, you go to like the coach's room or something like that, you come back. And I remember for this one, I went to school in Noblesville, which is just north of here. And we were told, be back at school by 4:30. And so I and a whole bunch of our wrestling friends would go to the McDonald's that's right behind Noblesville High School, and then there's a drugstore right behind the high school, also a CVS or a Walgreens or something like that. It's gone now. We went to the McDonald's first. I didn't buy anything because I was trying to make weight for wrestling. And then we were going over to the CVS, and I wasn't going to buy any candy that day because I had to make weight for wrestling. But earlier in the day, I had seen a kid in the hallway using Banaka breath spray. And Banaka breath spray is the stuff that comes in a little canister like that, and when you want it mac on the ladies, you can go and you spray it into your mouth like minty fresh, and then you go talk to the ladies, and the ladies dig you. Or at least that's what I convinced myself of. And I'd seen a kid in the hallway using it earlier, and I decided, you know what, that's what I was going to go get. Problem is, it's expensive. It was like $3 for that little can of stuff. And I was like, that's way too much money. But if it's free, that's a much better price. So I decided I was going to steal Banaka breath spray. Never stolen it before. Once again, only did candy and comic books. But I decided today, might as well go for it. Remember walking into the drugstore, and it had a double set of sliding glass doors. Where you have like a little airlock, like one door is open and then you go in and the door is open. Except these were, in the old days, we didn't have sliding doors. We did, these weren't very popular. You had to actually push them with your hand. And so I remember went through one door, went through the second door, got into the place. I did not know where the breath spray was, so I'm walking all around until I eventually found it in some aisle. And then I had to figure out how to steal it. And I remember walking around with it in my hand through the store, trying to figure out how I was going to go about stealing it. And I went down to the last aisle of the store, which was the drugs aisle. I figured no one uses this aisle in a drugstore. And so I went down to this last aisle, and I was right. There was no one in that aisle because there was no one in front of me and no one behind me. And I walked down the aisle, and I just took it, and just in a package just like this one. I just ripped it open, pulled out the little canister, shoved it into my coat pocket, because remember I was wearing a coat because it was cold, and then just took the package and wadded it up and just like crammed it into a random shelf. And then kept walking around the store. Past some friends of mine who were in there. There's a whole, I was in there like, 10, 12, 15 friends of mine on the wrestling team. And they were in the process of all shoplifting too, because they were horrible kids like me. And I remember passing a friend of mine who was buying something at the front clerk area. I remember like talking to him and hitting him on the back, and then going out the door, and I was like, I'll meet you guys outside. And I went out the front door, where I went out the first glass door, you had to push it open, and there was that little hallway, and I had gone through and grabbed the second glass door. I remember that door opened toward me, and I had grabbed that door and opened it this way when I felt a hand come down on my shoulder while my hand was still holding on to the door, and a voice behind me say, "Where do you think you're going?" In just that sudden crap feeling of just everything just falling out of my stomach and just being like, I knew I was doing something wrong. I knew I was shoplifting, and I'd never been caught. And I wondered what it'd be like to get caught, but I was pretty happy I'd never experienced it. And it all flooded into me at that moment. I was like, this is going to suck. And I can remember standing there, holding the door, looking through this glass door that halfway open, seeing freedom and a bright sunny day on the other side of this door, and knowing that as soon as I turned around, everything was going to change. And I held on to that door. And then I realized I'm a wrestler. And as a wrestler, I'm half ninja. So whoever it is behind me is obviously an old person, because I could tell from the voice and the heaviness of the hand. And the chances of them being able to stop me or catch me were very slow. And so all I'd have to do is a spin maneuver and knock the hand off, open the door, spin out the door, and run, and I'm going to be gone before they have a chance of getting to me. And then the other side of my voice spoke up, and it said, but the store behind you is full of other wrestlers, and one of them is going to rat you out and give you their name, or give up your name. And which would you rather have? Be arrested right here, right now, or wonder for the rest of the day when it's going to happen, and then wait till you're in class tomorrow, and then wait till the police come into the classroom to arrest you? Which one would be worse? And I remember just sitting there staring out the door, trying to figure out which decision to go with, while this person stood behind me with a hand on my shoulder, and I did the toughest thing I'd done in my life up to that point. I let go of the door. And I just remember watching the door fall away from me and just going, this is so going to suck. And turning around, and there was a guy in a full white jacket behind me. The pharmacist was standing right there, an older, bald guy. And he was like, were you planning on paying for that? And being the witty fellow I was, I responded with, paying for what? Nailed it. And he goes, the thing that you just tried to steal. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said two things. One, he held up the smashed package in one hand, and the other one he goes, son, we have cameras. Do we need to go back and watch it? And I just went, oh, crap. So I was like, no. I remember reaching into my jacket and pulling it out, and him grabbing it with the hand that had the trash from it. And then I remember thinking in my head for just a moment, that's it. Now I've learned my lesson. I'm never going to steal again, and I'm going to get to go free, and everything is going to be, and it wasn't, because then he just pushed me through the store. He's like, you're coming with me. And I was like, oh, crap. I remember him leading me back through the store with his hand on my shoulder, walking me through, and like everyone on the wrestling team coming out of the aisles and staring and looking at me, and me just looking at the floor and not wanting to look up as he led me back through the entire place. And he led me into the back room. They have like little double doors. And then going through the doors, and he grabbed a chair and slid it out and slammed it down into the middle of this little back storage area. And he was like, I'm going to call the police. And he sat me down, and he put down the trash and the little thing on the little like desk that was there. I remember him calling the police, like we called a shoplifter. And I remember I just sat in this chair with my feet on the ground and just looking around this room, and it was just like, it all changes. Like, right now, my life is going to be different from this point forward. I'm that person. I'm that kid that got caught stealing, that is a shoplifter. And he is in the process of calling the police. And it's not a dream. You kept trying to do the whole, nope, not waking up, still actually happening. And it was awful. And I found out that I was a bigger idiot than I thought, because that aisle I walked down when there was no one in front of me and no one behind me, there was no one in front of me and no one behind me. But it turns out the wall that was next to me was a glass wall because the pharmacists were on the other side of the wall, and I just walked in front of them, just going and just stole this while they're going, is that idiot child stealing right in front? Yeah, that's this guy. And so I found out about that one. I was like, oh, that's something. And I remember sitting there in this chair, and a number of things went through my mind while I was sitting there. Because I had like 15, 20 minutes before the cops showed up to officially arrest me. And a lot will go through your mind while you're sitting there waiting for the world to end. One, I remember I was in the process, I had in my advanced English class, we had to give a speech. And one of our speeches was we had to memorize a poem and recite it in front of the class. And I had chosen the Shel Silverstein poem, The Queen is Coming. And I remember I had just finished memorizing it. And in my head, I kept saying the poem over and over again to try and keep myself from crying. Because I didn't want to cry when the police showed up, because I didn't think that looked very tough. But I was really close to crying at that point. Another part that came to my head was gangster rap was really popular at this time. And I was listening to a lot of NWA and Eazy-E, and a lot of what they were rapping about was yelling at the police, and that when you get arrested, you don't give them your name and stuff like that. And so I was like, all right, I'm going in hard, and I'm not going to give up my name, and this skinny little white boy is going to throw down. And so like, all this stuff is going through my head. It didn't happen, but that's why I was trying to talk myself up. And then the other part I had was sitting in this room, about where my cabinets are, was the back door of the place, that you could just walk out and leave. There's just a door. I could just walk over, push that door, and leave. And it had a little thing that said, like, push door, alarm will sound. But I'm like, I could be out that door and running and be gone. And what stopped me is I'd like to say it was my moral code, and the fact that that's not the person I am that would run. But that's not what it was. I would have happily run, except for the fact that I was afraid that they had me on camera. And once again, I was afraid they would go to the school and show up with a video of me stealing and showing it to the principal and then come and pull me out of class. And once again, I had that thought of, which would be worse, dealing with it now or getting pulled out of the class to get arrested. And I decided that dealing with it right now was probably the better choice. Not the most moral of decisions, but it's what I ended up going with. So I sat there until the cop walked in. I remember he came in by, I don't remember if he came in by himself or with the pharmacist. Right? I remember the cop coming in and him walking in and seeing me, and he was a bigger guy. And him looking like, there's the thief. And that's what he called me the whole time, the thief. He walked over to me. He picked up the evidence, the sprayer and the package, and he took that and put that into his pocket. And he came over to me, and I'm sure he read me my rights. I don't remember that part. I remember him putting on handcuffs. He turned me around and did the whole handcuffs behind your hand, behind your back thing, and handcuffs, if you never had them on, are really painful. They're really hard and metal and cold and pinchy, and they go right into your bones. And I was slightly bigger than Twiggy, so now they definitely fit my hands, and it was uncomfortable. And I remember him taking me through the store, and when he did, he grabbed me by my left arm, so it came up like that, and he was taller than me. So I remember it pulled this arm down, and it was uncomfortable, and it was hard to walk, and he walked me through the store like that. I remember as I went through the place, what stands out to me as I walked through the store was a mom and her daughter who were shopping there. And the mom looking up from the shopping and seeing me and grabbing her daughter and moving her daughter behind her, like I was this criminal threat that she had to protect her daughter from. And it was just this sinking feeling in my gut. It was just, I'm that person. I'm the person that parents have to protect their children from. Little would we know, years later, I'm a teacher. And so then I remember going out in the front of it and not seeing any of my friends that were in the store. And I was like, oh, well, thank goodness for that. And I remember walking past the clerk in the front and her just giving me a horrible, evil, mean look. I remember walking and going through the front, the double doors, and I remember him opening up the last door. I'm thinking, oh, the last time I was grabbing for that door, I was a free person. Life sucks. And then going out the door and his cop car being sitting right there with the lights going, not the sirens, the woo-woo wasn't going, but the lights were going. And I remember as I walked from the door to the cop car, looking over to my right, which was the length of the building, and then seeing heads popping around the edge of the building, which were my friends who stayed to watch me get arrested, because that's what friends do. And I remember like, there's like a little totem pole, like little heads just like poking out around the side. And I remember him like looking over, the cop, like laughing and like looking over there and seeing him. He was like, that's funny. And I was like, oh, that makes me feel sick. And then putting me in the front seat. I didn't get in the back seat. Remember, I got sat in the front seat. And I remember when I sat down, there was a shotgun that's bolted into like the little passenger seat. And when he put me into the seat, my hands were still behind me. The shotgun was like pointed right into my face, which is when I like moved my head around it. I'm like, oh, that's odd. And then sat down, and then he had to put the seatbelt on me, and then he would click it in. And I remember what he told me when he put the seatbelt on, and he said this in the most degrading, disgusted voice when he clicked me in. He goes, "Son, try not to steal anything while you're in my car," and then shut the door on me. And I was like, I'm handcuffed. I'm like, I can't steal anything. But it was just the way he said it. I was just, I felt like scum. And then he came around and he got in the car. And in Noblesville, the police station is all like 2.5 minutes from the high school. So it was like a 2.5 minute drive. So it was really quick. And I don't remember if he said anything or not. I remember sitting in the car, being uncomfortable with my hands behind me. And I remember jumping, not jumping, but my memory jumps to being in like the little office. It was like a room, like in like an interrogation room. It was like his office room, like a desk and a computer. And I remember having to sit down there, and he took off the handcuffs, and he called my mom. My mom had to come pick me up, and that was not a happy conversation. And I remember having to sit there while waiting for my mom to come get me. And while I was sitting there and she had to come get me, I was looking around the room, and just as you do, I gave him all the information. We had time, and he was sitting behind his desk, probably like entering the information. Scumbag kid just picked up for criminal laws. And so while I was sitting there, one whole wall was wanted posters of like people who had done crime, stuff like that. And being curious, and once again, trying not to cry, I was looking at this whole wall of wanted posters. And I remember him looking up at me at one point and seeing me check out this wall of wanted posters. And once again, I remember what he said. And he was like, "Oh, looking for your future location, huh?" And I was like, And I was like, that's a punch in the gut again. And I'm sure I came back with something witty like, "No." And then just sat there. And I remember my mom coming to get me. I remember her not yelling at me, which was even worse than her actually yelling at me, just being disappointed. I remember her, I had to stop at like a little desk where we got to, she checked me out or something, and I wasn't really paying attention at that point. I was just looking down at the car, or at the ground, and trying not to cry. And I remember going out to the car, and I remember the car ride home from the police station, and my mom, once again, not yelling at me, just telling me how incredibly disappointed she was, how this was not how she raised me, how could I be the son that she thought she knew and loved, and all those things that just make the soul inside of you shrivel up inside and just die. And I remember sitting in the front passenger seat of our gray Pontiac Bonneville, and I had the seatbelt on. I remember I had my feet up on the little front part of the car, dashboard. And I remember I had my arms around my knees and just my head leaning against the window and just staring out the window, watching everything go by. Hadn't cried at that point still, was strong. And just realizing my life's different. I mean, from going forward, I have now been officially arrested. I will now have a criminal record. I will now be that person forevermore. And just everything goes through your head. How are kids at school going to treat me? How is this going to affect me in school? How is this going to affect me with my friends? Are my friends going to still like me? Am I even going to still have friends? Am I still going to be on the wrestling team? If I ever try to ask out a girl, is this going to be the first thing that comes up? If I try to ask someone out, they're like, "Hey, weren't you the guy that got..." Nope, never mind. And then so like that's all the stuff that's going through my head. And then we get home. My mom was like, "Why don't you head up to your room and then wait till your dad gets home and we'll come talk to you." And so I remember going up to my room and just laying on my bed and staring at the ceiling and just continuing all those thoughts. And then my dad got home, and my dad was not a yeller. He was very much like me. And he and my mom came in, and they once again sat me down and had that same discussion. And they didn't yell at me. They really didn't even ground me. They said, your life's going to be different now, going forward. There's not much that we can do to you that's going to be any worse than what life is going to do to you going forward. Like, you understand how we feel and how disappointed we are. But like, grounding you is not going to change anything. And I was just like, oh, I feel so bad. And it was just awful. And it was bad. There is no way of making it not sound bad from that point forward. I ended up having to go in front of a judge. I had to go to court. I ended up getting deferred probation. And what deferred probation is, it was my first offense. I was a good kid. I was in advanced classes and stuff like that. And the judge was like, this is your first time getting in trouble, because apparently the 7-year-old thing didn't actually go on my record. Yay. And so because of that, he was like, as long as you don't get arrested again before you turn 18, then this will go away. If you get picked up for anything between now and the day you turn 18, you will get punished for whatever the new thing is, plus we're going to come back and punish you for this one too. But as long as you don't get in trouble, then this goes away. He's like, that's your motivation to make good choices. He goes, now here's the problem. If you're out with friends somewhere and the police pick you guys up for something, they're going to let your friends go. You're going to end up coming back to jail and seeing me, because this will pop up immediately. And what it's going to say on your record is, this kid does not get to go free. This kid comes back before the judge. He's like, do you understand? I'm like, I understand. And so it went forward from there. And that, as much as it sucked, and it did, because I'd love to say that kids are very forgiving and friendly, but they're not. That's not how life goes. It changed. I mean, the next month or so of school was awful. It was probably the worst month I ever had of school, of kids looking at me differently. I remember walking into classrooms, in the same advanced classes that I'd been in the whole year, kids I'd known for 3 years, because I moved when I was in 5th grade to 6th grade, and walking in and having kids move their stuff out of the way when I would walk into the classroom. Like their pencil bags and stuff like that. They would see they have it sitting out, they would see me, and they would just pack stuff up and move it away, as if I was going to walk in and steal their stuff. And people would call me thief in the hallway and stuff like that, and it sucked. But at the same time, it helped me in the fact that it became my excuse whenever poor choices were made when I was in high school to not partake in those poor choices. And that's another story to get into also, is my home life was not strong growing up. I had a lot of drugs and alcohol in my family. I'm the only person in my family who has not served actual jail time. I'm the only person in my family who has not had drug and alcohol addiction. And a lot of that came from this arrest, because I was so paranoid all throughout my high school career, getting picked up for drinking or picked up for drugs, that I didn't drink or do drugs throughout high school. And I'd love to say it's because, once again, I was a morally strong person. It wasn't. It went to two things. One, I was scared of being arrested again. Anytime that we were out somewhere and there was drinking or drugs, I left, because I was like, I'm not getting arrested again. I was like, I hated it the first time. I was like, I'm not doing it again. And so it kept me from it. And then another big part of it was growing up and seeing my uncle get arrested for cocaine when I was a kid and spend time in jail. Of having grandparents who were alcoholics and not being able to go out to dinner with them after 4 o'clock because we'd get kicked out of restaurants because they were so bad. I knew what drugs and alcohol was even when I was young. And I was paranoid, because it runs in my family, that if any kind of drugs or alcohol, my bloodline gets addicted to it very quickly. And so I was paranoid about having that happen to me. And so that kept me from doing it throughout high school. I still made other poor choices, but that was a strong contributor to me making better choices. So looking back on it, as much as I hated that event, it strengthened me. It made me a tougher person, because I was able to survive that, and it didn't destroy my life. I felt like it was, and I felt like I was done, but I didn't. And there's 2 other events that get connected to that. One, I got horribly hazed by my wrestling team. Stuff that nowadays would get the wrestling coach fired. because the next day on the wrestling team, I came back to school. And my parents would not let me skip. They're like, that's part of your punishment is you have to go to school and you are going to face what happens from this. That was awful. But going on the wrestling team, I embarrassed the wrestling team, and the coach was very outgoing and letting me know that. So at wrestling the next day, by the way, wrestling is pretty much legalized child beating, which is why I love wrestling and helping out with it whenever I can, because it's just awesome. But showing up the next day, and he was like, the very beginning of practice, he was like, I hope you understand that we had someone on our team embarrass us as a team, and the fact that when you embarrass us as a team, that reflects poorly on us. So because of that, we need to help you understand your poor choices. And so I was about 135, 140-pound kid in my freshman year, and he put me with our 180-pound wrestler who was a senior for wrestling drills. And essentially we did throwing practice, and throwing practice is where you throw someone through the air. And so I was being thrown by this kid that outweighed me by 50 pounds. And it hurt. I mean, I came out of that bruised, and I did not complain at all for fear of making it worse. And then it got worse, because at the very end of it was called a throwing dummy. And a throwing dummy is something at the high school. It's a 150-pound stuffed dummy. It just looks like this. Looks like it's a stuffed person. And you use it to practice throws. And at the end of practice, they went and mat taped me to it. And mat tape is like stronger duct tape. And at the end of it, the coach said, I'm going to leave now, and I'm going to leave it up to our seniors to make sure an event like this never happens again. And then he just walked out of the room, and the rest of the team all turned to me. And once again, I had that, oh, crap, feeling. And they picked me up by my body, held me in the air, slammed me onto the top of this wrestling dummy, and then taped my arms to it, and then taped my legs to it, and then taped my head to it. And then from there, they took turns throwing this wrestling dummy through the air. With not me being able to do anything to stop it. And so I just landed, and it was probably 15 minutes of just being thrown through the air like that. And then at the very end, they took the wrestling dummy and threw it into the corner of the wrestling room. So I was upside down with my arms out, my legs taped to it, and my feet into the air. And they just turned out the lights and then just left me in there, taped in the corner. And I remember sitting in there once again just thinking, from the choices you make, this is the world you get to live in. And thinking that this came from the choices I had made, and this is what had happened to me. And after 5 or 10 minutes of being in there, some of my friends snuck back in and cut me down. And so that I could get out, they had to wait for the seniors to leave, and then they came in and freed me. Stuff like that today would get a coach fired, but back when we had dinosaurs, it was one of those things that it was okay. And then one other event that I can remember with it was a couple weeks after it had happened, and life sucked, and things were going horribly. I was after school for a wrestling meet, and I did not go out with the team anymore. We had a wrestling meet, I stayed at the school. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I remember I was sitting in one of the back hallways of the school, like sitting there doing homework, and I looked up, and there was a kid walking towards me. And this kid walking towards me was one of the scary kids at school. In Noblesville, we had scary kids. We had, basically, remember from the greasers, from the outsiders, we had kids that were like greasers who we knew smoked and drank and brought knives to school and stuff like that. And it was one of those kids who I knew scared me. And he looked at me. I looked up, made eye contact, and he starts walking towards me. And I had another, oh crap. I remember just like looking down, thinking like, keep on walking, keep on walking, keep on walking. And he didn't. He walked up right next to me and looked down, and he goes, hey, you're that kid that shoplifted, aren't you? And I was like, uh-huh. He was like, life sucks right now, doesn't it? I was like, uh-huh. He goes, look at me. I look up at him. He goes, it gets better. I go, what? That's my thought too. And he goes, when I was in 8th grade, I shoplifted pencils. He's like, my friends made fun of me. It sucked, and it was the worst thing I've ever gone through. He's like, kids made fun of me for about a month, and then something else happens, and then kids move on. I just went, uh-huh. He was like, if you can get through these next couple of weeks, something else is going to happen, and then things get better. And I was like, okay. Then that was it, and he just walked away. And I was like, that was weird. But he was right. within another week or two, something else happened that got kids' attention, they moved on, and people forgot about it. And it, like, by the time winter happened, by the time spring came around, it was no longer an issue. And I mean, it still haunted me, but it wasn't a thing at the school. And it's one of those things that stuck with me, this random person, and he didn't have to be nice to me for whatever reason, we never talked. I was some crappy little kid that was in class, and he stopped and gave me that advice. It was those little things you do, those little ripples that make a difference in the world, that it helped. And the fact that it was a nice thing for him to do, and it was true. And that kept me, once again, it made an impact on me, and it kept me from getting arrested for another 4 years. And I made it all the way until I turned 18 before I got arrested again. Now the problem we're going to have here is that I don't have enough time to get through the story, and we're not going to have time tomorrow to get through the story. The good news is my other classes, who yell at each other slightly less than you guys, I'm a little bit farther ahead with them, so I'll be able to finish the story. So if you want to, I'll start it for you, but if you want to get the whole story, then you're going to have to go listen to one of those, so that you can tell random people in the hallway about how I got arrested. So I got through all of high school without getting arrested. Yay me. I hope all of you can say the same thing. And so I didn't drink throughout high school because of that same fear. I hung out with kids who drank. I hung out with kids who did drugs. And a lot was because I had friends from junior high who I was friends with before they started doing drugs. And that's, once again, a story for another day that we didn't get a chance to get into. But they started doing drugs, and I had to make the choice, do you stop hanging out with someone because they do drugs or not? And I chose not to, even though I didn't do the drugs myself. But, like I said, if you want to get the rest of that story, tomorrow. I've got something else for you guys completely.